It's 1972. Think about that for a second. The Beatles are gone. Led Zeppelin is the biggest band in the world. David Bowie is Ziggy Stardust. Rock and roll has changed. It's louder, it's heavier, it's weirder. It's a whole different animal from the thing that burst out of Memphis in the 1950s. And the man who started it all, he's in Las Vegas, he's wearing a white jumpsuit. He's a living legend, he's an institution, but is he still a rock and roller? That's the question. It's a question he might have been asking himself he was winning an award. That wasn't the problem. The Recording Academy, the people who hand out the Grammys, they loved him now. They had given him a Lifetime Achievement Award back in '71. It was a nice gesture. A way of saying, okay, we get it, you were important. But it was also a way of putting him in a museum. It was an award for the past. His competitive Grammys told a different story. He had a few of them on his mantle at Graceland, but they weren't for Heartbreak Hotel. They weren't for Jailhouse Rock. They weren't for any of the earth-shaking records that had changed the world. Every single competitive Grammy he had won and would ever win in his lifetime was for gospel music. Think about the irony of that. The man who scared parents and preachers, the one they called vulgar, the one they would only film from the waist up, was only being awarded for singing songs about God. The establishment that once tried to shut him down now only patted him on the back when he was at his most respectable. For an artist that has to mess with your head, it's a kind of praise that feels like a cage. They loved his soul, but they seem to have forgotten about his guts. He was the king of rock and roll. That was his title. It was on the posters, it was in the press releases, but the industry that supposedly crowned him refused to give him a trophy for his actual day job. He'd see other artists, the ones who followed the path he cleared, walk up and accept awards for Best Rock Performance. And he would be nominated, if at all, for Best Sacred Performance. It was a strange kind of respect. It was respectability, and that's not the same thing as respect. Respectability is safe. Rock and roll was never meant to be safe. He knew that better than anyone. So, in the midst of the Vegas years, with the big ballads and the karate moves and the adoring crowds, there must have been a part of him that felt a disconnect. He was the biggest star on the planet, selling out shows night after night. He was making more money than he'd ever dreamed of. But the currency of artistic validation, the Grammy for Rock, eluded him. It wasn't about needing another trophy. It was about being seen for what he was, for what he had always been. The king. The early 70s were a strange time for him creatively. The '68 comeback special had been a massive success. It was raw, it was hungry, it was a reminder of the power he still held. He'd walked away from the silly movie musicals and plugged back into the source. But that comeback didn't lead to a new era of rock records. It led almost directly to the jumpsuit and the Vegas residency. And Vegas had its own demands. The shows were slick, they were professional. They had a huge orchestra and backing singers. The set lists were a mix of his old hits, powerful ballads like an American Trilogy, and contemporary covers of songs by artists like Neil Diamond and Simon and Garfunkel. He was a master showman, his voice was arguably at its peak, a powerful, versatile instrument. But the material wasn't always challenging him. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was a carnival barker at heart. He cared about ticket sales and merchandise. He wasn't interested in artistic growth or chasing the trends of modern rock. He wanted a reliable product, and Elvis in Vegas was the most reliable product in entertainment. So, the recording sessions of the era often reflected this. Lots of ballads, lots of countrypolitan tunes, well-crafted songs, sung beautifully, but often lacking the fire that had defined him. He was recording in Hollywood, RCA Studio C. The band was incredible. You had James Burton on guitar, a legend. Jerry Sheff on bass, Ronnie Tutt on drums. These guys could play anything. They were tight, professional, the best in the business. But they were often tasked with creating lush soundscapes for ballads. They were a rock and roll band often asked to play something else. Then a demo tape arrived. It was from a songwriter named Dennis Linde. Linde was a talented writer who could blend rock, funk, and country. And this song he sent over was different. It wasn't a ballad, it wasn't a gospel tune. It was a straight-up, full-throttle rock song. It had a churning, funky guitar riff. It had a driving rhythm. And the lyrics were pure, unapologetic desire. It was about a fever, a physical need, a love that was consuming. It was primal. It was the kind of thing Little Richard could have screamed. The story goes that Elvis wasn't immediately sold on it. Maybe it felt a little too simple. Maybe it didn't have the emotional grandeur of the ballads he was drawn to at the time. He listened to it, but he wasn't feeling it. He set it aside. But the band, especially his drummer, Ronnie Tutt, heard something in it. Tutt was a powerhouse. His drumming was the engine of the live shows. He knew what moved a crowd. He heard the potential in that riff and that beat. He and the others started working on it, building an arrangement that was muscular and relentless. They convinced him to give it a try, and when he finally stood at the microphone and let it rip, something clicked. The song wasn't about sophisticated emotion, it was about pure energy, and that was something he understood deep in his bones. He attacked the vocal. He wasn't just singing the words, he was testifying. You can hear the grit in his voice, the slight strain as he pushes into the upper register. You can hear the fun he's having. It was a release. It was a vacation from the weighty, serious material. It was just a chance to rock. The session was electric. The final take is a masterclass in controlled chaos. The bass line is a relentless throb. The drums are a frantic, joyful explosion. The horns come in like exclamation points. And over it all, his voice, confident and commanding. It's the sound of a man remembering who he is. It's not the sound of a Vegas headliner. It's not the sound of a gospel singer, it's the sound of the king of rock and roll. When the song was released, it was a smash. It shot up the charts. It was his biggest hit in years. More importantly, it was a hit that sounded like it belonged on the radio in 1972. It wasn't a nostalgia act. It had a modern edge. It was tough. It connected with a new generation of listeners while reminding the old ones what the fuss was all about in the first place. And on stage, the song became a monster. It was the perfect addition to his live show. It was one of the few new songs that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Hound Dog and All Shook Up, and not feel like a step down in energy. When the band kicked into that opening riff, the crowd would erupt. He would feed off that energy, stalking the stage, sweat pouring down his face, delivering the lyrics with a kind of primal glee. It was a showstopper. You can see it in the footage from the Aloha from Hawaii concert. In a set full of epic, sweeping performances, this song is a jolt of pure adrenaline. It's a 3-minute blast of rock and roll perfection. It was proof that the fire was still there, and proof that beneath the cape and the jewels, the heart of a rocker was still beating. So, here was the moment. He had a genuine, massive rock hit. A song that was both commercially successful and artistically vital. It was undeniable. It was the kind of song that Grammys are made for. It was powerful, it was well produced, and it featured a stunning vocal performance from an icon. This had to be the one, right? This would be the song that would finally break the gospel curse. This would be the one that would earn him the industry's top prize for the music he invented. The Grammy nominations came out. He was nominated. But it wasn't what you think. The song itself, the single, wasn't nominated for Best Rock Vocal Performance. It wasn't even nominated for Best Pop Vocal Performance. The industry still didn't seem to know what to do with him. Instead, the album it appeared on, a live recording from his Madison Square Garden shows, was nominated for Album of the Year. That's a huge category, the biggest of the night. But it wasn't a rock category. It was a general category, and the nomination was for the entire album, not specifically for that one fiery track. And what was it up against? It was a tough year. There was Don McLean's American Pie, a cultural touchstone. There was Harry Nilsson's Nilsson Schmilsson, a critical darling. And then there was the winner, The Concert for Bangladesh by George Harrison and Friend. That wasn't just an album, it was a historic event. It was the first major rock benefit concert, a massive undertaking that brought together rock royalty for a good cause. It was important with the capital. It was music as a social statement. How could a live album from a Vegas headliner, even one as great as Elvis, compete with that? He lost. Of course he lost. And in the grand scheme of things, it was the right call. The Concert for Bangladesh deserved the award. But it highlights the fundamental problem. The one song that should have put him squarely in the rock category, the one song that was his best shot in years, was overlooked as a single. The industry praised him for his overall showmanship with the album nomination, but they still refused to acknowledge him as a contemporary rock artist. The box they had put him in, the box of living legend and gospel singer, was still firmly locked. So, did he believe the song would be the one? It's hard to say for sure. By 1972, he was a more insulated figure. He was surrounded by his entourage. He was less concerned with the day-to-day business of the music industry. He was likely more focused on the immediate thrill of performing for a live audience than on chasing industry awards. The man who had faced down riots and controversy in the 50s was probably not sitting by the phone waiting for a Grammy nomination. But he was still an artist. And every artist, on some level, wants their work to be recognized for what it is. He had to know what this song was. He could feel it every night on stage. He could hear it in the roar of the crowd. This song was a statement. It was a reminder to the world, and maybe to himself, that he wasn't a museum piece. He could still create music that was visceral, exciting, and dangerous. The very things that had made him famous in the first place. Maybe he didn't think in terms of This will win me a Grammy. Maybe it was more fundamental than that. Maybe the song itself was the victory was in the recording session where he rediscovered that raw energy. The victory was in hearing it on the radio next to the new generation of rock stars. The victory was in the explosion of applause every time he performed it live. That was real validation. It was more real than a gold-plated gramophone. The song represented an opportunity for the world to see him clearly again. Not as the movie star, not as the Vegas caricature, but as the raw force of nature that he was. And for a moment, it seemed like everyone got the message. The song was a hit. It was everywhere. It was undeniable, but the industry, in its infinite wisdom, still managed to miss the point. They heard the spectacle, but they missed the fire. In the years that followed, he would sink deeper into the patterns of his life. The shows continued, the health problems worsened, the new recordings became more sporadic and often less inspired. There would be flashes of brilliance, of course. His voice could still raise the roof on a ballad. But there would never be another rock and roll hit. Like this one, it was the last time he truly connected with the mainstream on a rock song. It was his last great stand as a contemporary rock artist. It's the final peak before the long, slow decline. It's the last time he sounded not just great, but also relevant. The song is a testament to what could have been. What if he had taken that energy and run with it? What if he had sought out more writers like Dennis Linde? What if he had gone into the studio with a rock producer who would push him? We'll never know. But we have this one song. This one perfect, explosive, 3-minute artifact that proves the king never really gave up his throne. He just got distracted. Looking back, the Grammy question feels almost beside the point. Winning an award would have been nice, a tidy end to the story, but the real story is in the music itself. The song didn't need a Grammy to be validated. It validated itself every time it came on the radio, every time it filled a dance floor, every time it made someone turn up the volume and feel that same feverish energy that he felt in the studio that day. It was his last truly great rock and roll sermon. It was a final, emphatic statement. It said, "Don't forget who I am. Don't forget where all this came from." He may have been singing gospel to win awards, but this was the song that testified to his true religion, rock and roll. The song was pure, unapologetic, and loud. It was everything he was at his best. The song was Burning Love.